Welcome to a podcast special release of the Final Straw's interview of two members from the Haymaker, a gym project underway in Chicago, Illinois. The Haymaker's principles of unity are as follows. Quote, as organizers, we believe in autonomy, strength, and solidarity. Because we believe in autonomy, we know that we must learn to fight our enemies without relying on institutions that disempower us and macho gym cultures that weaken us. We must learn to fight for ourselves. Because we believe in strength, we know that we must be stronger than those who want us to suffer or to wipe us out completely. We must learn to be unafraid as we become a force capable not only of self-defense, but of social transformation. Because we believe in solidarity, we know that our personal transformation is at once collective transformation and that an injury to one is indeed an injury to all. We will learn how to keep each other safe as we become dangerous together. Unquote. If you want to toss them some ducats, find their Indiegogo. It's up on Indiegogo.com. If you're inspired to work on something like this in your own town, hit them up at Haymaker Chi, that's Haymaker CHI, at riseup.net, or on the Fedbook or Twitter by their handle at Haymaker Chi. So I'm speaking with organizers of the Haymarket Gym, an explicitly anarchist and anti-fascist gymnasium in Chicago, Illinois. Thanks a lot for taking the time to chat, Meyer and Joey.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having us. I heard you say Haymarket. It's actually Haymaker.
Oh, God, I'm sorry. Yeah, I have it written right in front of me as Haymaker, so...
We actually chose the name Haymaker because it's somewhat easy to confuse with Haymarket, which is obviously a historical site in Chicago.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Good job, it worked on me. So self-defense and training in anti-racist circles it's nothing new. Can you tell a little history about the gym and the project and why you thought the time was right to make the project so public?
So this is Joy with Haymaker Gym, and just thanks for having us. So some of us have actually lived in Europe for a while. We're sort of an internationally focused group as well, and have heard of public, openly anti-fascist political gyms and anti-fascist fitness movements. In Europe. Also, when we were doing research, we saw that it was in Latin America. So we sort of had this in our background knowledge, and with that in mind, we sort of we're witnessing the rise of Trump, the far right, and immense amounts of violence poured out by the state against Black folks, and we started to realize that as friends in the autonomous political scene in Chicago, we were relatively untrained for situations arising out of the political environment. So that was sort of one thing. And so we sort of joked around we should start a cheetah gym and, work out with each other. Some of us were already working out because of recent, one of our friends lost a limb. So he had started to work out more. But also, we noticed that, there are these gyms in Europe, but doesn't seem like there are these openly anti-fascist, politically oriented gyms in the U.S. And so that's sort of what we sort of felt like we could contribute to the scene in that way, while also helping build our own autonomy. And in addition to being personally relevant, actual hate crimes have risen by 20% in Chicago in the last 5 years. And groups in the city have been organizing defense groups already. So that was already a thing that was happening and sort of something that we're swept up into as well. And we're also aware of underground anti-fascist circles, but sort of our view of anti-fascism is more of a political position that is open to a larger number of participants. And so we see the gym as a practical way to make ourselves visible to others who might be looking to make connections and who would like to train but don't know how to start or don't have access to gyms or don't feel welcome there. So it's all of that sort of wrapped into it.
To add on to it, and while obviously it's part of an explicitly anti-fascist project, I think many of us within the collective, and we've had discussions about this, see anti-fascism as an important and significant framework, but also to a certain extent quite limited for what we want to try to achieve with the gym. So we envision the gym as a kind of one nodal point within a larger process of trying to reclaim and reappropriate territory within Chicago for the purposes of actually cultivating autonomous projects, right? So obviously the gym starts at the position of the most material thing that we have, which is our bodies, right? But I mean, a number of us within the collective, or just generally among a number of us, of our friends, we're invested in other kind of projects about building autonomy, whether it's autonomy in terms of training or meeting spaces or printing workshops, or bars or hangout spaces, right? There's a general kind of position about taking back territory, and in order to, cultivate our lives in the way we want to actually do, because we feel that we've been largely dispossessed by the state and other forces of the far right, that we want to fight back and reclaim ownership of our own lives.
Besides a focus on building resilience to far-right stranger violence, the project has also expressed a position of looking to enable resistance to intimate and partner violence. Can you talk about endemic domestic violence and how your position of building self-defense and taking back space and enabling people, how that jives with your radical autonomous anti-capitalist positions?
Yeah, for sure. And I think this precisely this question kind of gets at what we see as the kind of limitation of the anti-fascist framework that we see. And I mean, we're kind of at this very interesting juncture right now, obviously, where anti-fascism has been a much more dominant lens of thought or practice within European or Latin American movements, and it's somewhat new here in the U.S. context. So we see the possibilities being very open, and so part of the project is to kind of go beyond the limitations that we've seen. And I think this element of gendered violence is precisely one of these aspects, because we want to address aspects of violence that easily go unacknowledged or slip into the sidelines of anti-fascism and other current movements, because we recognize the less public but nonetheless ongoing reality of intimate partner violence, or intimate violence generally. I mean, I think one of the things that we see within the U.S. about the kind of resistance or confrontations that happen with anti-fascism, they tend to be kind of more forms of spectacles that happen in public, right? So the battles at Berkeley or in other places where they're definitely more liable to be filmed in public, right? But the moment we think about the way in which a lot of violence is gendered, we realize that a lot of this violence happens outside the public eye and happens in more kind of domestic spheres. And so intimate partner violence or sexual violence, other targeted forms of assault usually that happens against femmes, happens outside the spotlight of the public eye or the camera. But that said, it's also quite a difficult topic to address, because, I mean, we're in no sense naive, and we don't want to say that intimate partner or partner violence can simply be addressed by practicing self-defense. And I mean, these situations are very complex. But we do believe that practicing collective self-defense training not only strengthens one's whole person in terms of one's physical bodily capacities to respond to violence, but also it creates confidence and opens new networks of forming bonds of friendships with others. And I think part of it is the GYM project may function as an intervention into the Chicago scene in an attempt to actually build a kind of culture of confidence. So we hope that a simultaneous strengthening of body and community will help in this. And this is why we see ourselves also standing in light of and in solidarity with folks like Brescia Meadows, who was a teenager who shot and killed her father after suffering years of abuse at his hands. And similarly, her mother and siblings who suffered abuse. And obviously, shooting one's father, an act of self-defense, is not really something that maybe one learns at a gym, but rather it's part of a kind of culture about one's ability to feel that they can strike back against abusers. And we see that as a legitimate and appropriate response to abuse inside and outside the home, if need be. And we realize that, of course, the whole spectacle of Brescia Meadows' trial, the fact that she's obviously being imprisoned, illustrates that the state and the police cannot and will not protect those who suffer from domestic abuse, and that police actually punish victims. And so that's why we see that we need to protect ourselves and one another. But there's also, beyond the kind of external dynamics of the gym, maybe Joy wants to say something about the kind of internal politics of the space that we hope to create.
Yeah. I mean, in addition to the gym being an autonomous gym, explicitly autonomous, and explicitly about self-defense, both public and more privately, we think of it as a queer gym, which is significantly different from typical macho gym culture, and even from some more macho circles within anarchist and antifa circles. And also, I mean, like, I feel bad about perpetuating that stereotype, because I think that there is a strong notion of involving femmes, involving queers in defense, and a lot of these groups are queers and femmes striking back. But anyways, yeah, we believe that anarchism must remain vigilant against pernicious forms of patriarchal violence. And in fact, that's been like a huge downfall towards our movement spreading. And also, we see this awareness as key to any discussion of liberation. We believe that as autonomous networks grow and we begin to be less dependent on capitalist forms of life, we'll be able to reconfigure what power relations look like, what gender looks like, if we even need that concept, and combat impulses that give rise to these forms of violence in the first place. So sort of like breaking down those gendered structures.
Definitely, it's a thing within a lot of anarchist circles, and I think that like a lot of us try to do work around internalized in the internalization of forms of oppression that we're socialized into, whether we are the target of those forces of oppression or whether we're also, suffering. Like I, as a cis dude, suffer from patriarchy to some degree, but definitely not in the same way that someone who's not a cis dude does. But I think that's been one of the critiques that's been most heavily laid around Antifa in European scenes, is that it tends to perpetuate a certain like machoism, or like even that intimate violence is an allowable thing that happens in some of those scenes. So it's like really refreshing to hear y'all coming from the position that you're coming from and saying the words you're saying.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, it actually makes our groups weaker, because it decreases it just decreases the size of the group, in my experience. And also, people don't work together as well, and it's like having someone who is on like some sort of like power kick, that like some male dude, actually that's like one of the ways that our enemies like ruin our groups. It's absolutely essential to any group for it to be strong, to have this sort of queering or anti-patriarchal stance.
Yeah, but it's truly in many respects, the kind of limit point, I think, a lot of our projects and struggles. I mean, this is still an area that in many respects, I think the anarchist milieu is still very stuck on. For years we went through this process of accountability models, then we went back through this kind of vision of vengeance and revenge taking, and then we went back through longer processes of how you deal with intimate partner violence. And I mean, we're still kind of, we still haven't figured it out in a certain sense, and we still are working through it. So it's not clear whether we'll discover new ventures, a way to kind of approach the topic. But at least one of the things, hopefully, that a kind of physical training site will be able to provide is that, forming bonds of friendship among people, and cross-gender relations of friendship, hopefully, is one of the ways in which you establish relations of care and bonds of intimacy among people that hopefully provide a kind of safety net, or at least a kind of pushback against gendered and patriarchal forms of violence. But I mean, this is it's something we're all still trying to figure through.
I would imagine the conversations that have been going on in Chicago aren't unlike those happening elsewhere in anti-authoritarian, feminist, and anti-racist, anti-capitalist scenes around Turtle Island. Like in response to an emboldened far right, the upticks in sexist, homophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, and racist attacks. Alongside the creation of projects like #SwoleLeft and Haymaker, armed self-defense initiatives, not just from the right, such as chapters of Pink Pistols, the John Brown Gun Club, Black Women's Defense League, and Redneck Revolt, are also on the rise. In your mind, what message does this express about the state of politics and resistance inside the United States?
Yeah, so this is a huge question, but briefly, we think this shows that folks are beginning to understand that there's a lot of power to be found in organizing together, and that we have enemies to fight. frustrations with liberal politics and permanent protests alongside direct threats from the far right have created an environment in which folks are increasingly understanding that a material force is necessary. And we can't afford to wait for someone else to develop one. And we can't rely on the state or maybe pre-existing groups to provide that force. So I think even before the rise of Trump, there was the Ferguson protests and the very very disturbing spectacle of police killings of Black folks have shown that further that we can't trust police or government to protect our friends and the most vulnerable. Also, at the same time, people are growing tired of feeling afraid and weak in their world, as the media portrays to us, just in general, and just from seeing acts of violence of people who are supposedly supposed to protect us, causing fear in us. And so we think that, like, the only thing on offer from these politics, which is a politics of fear or identity with victimhood, is not satisfying to people, and they're getting fed up. And so, autonomy through collective organizing shifts our focus towards what we can control and prepare for, and builds, a politics of our own values, anti-capitalist values, values of communization, values of sharing, that birth friendship, new projects and new identities together instead. And so it's a movement towards positivity and building.
Yeah, I just want to reemphasize something that Joey just said, which is specifically about this politics of fear. I mean, I think these kind of initiatives that you're talking about, the Pick Pistols projects, the John Brown Gun Club. I mean, even in Chicago, we're witnessing a massive rise of social centers. I mean, there's a social center in Little Village that we're a part of, called the Breakaway Autonomous Social Center. But there are a number of other social centers that have popped up. Bob Avakian's Revolutionary Communist Party has even started a social center in the South Side. But I think these. Sorry.
Go away, Bob.
Yeah, they're called the Revolution Club. If anyone wants to check them out. But honestly, I think these kind of material sites of collective organizing is probably where our strength is, because to me it's very interesting, because in the election and the victory of Trump in the US, obviously the reaction of a lot of people that you get, and you see this a lot, is we miss Obama, But the irony of the whole situation to me is, I think the strength of these kind of projects is that if Obama truly provided and created the conditions by which we would feel autonomous, it would mean that when Obama leaves, we ought not to feel afraid, because we have the very structures of self-defense and collective survival. But the very fact that a president's departure from office would leave people in such a state of fear illustrates to us that the state has never really been invested in at all in actually establishing collective power, that the state project has always been one of dispossession of people's control and capacity to have control and self-determine their own lives. And so to me, I think really these kind of concrete sites of self-defense and social centers and just generally kind of expanding territory of autonomous resistance, I think is really where we as anarchists like show our strength, where we actually concretely show to folks who are not really convinced about our projects where power really rests in the fact that we don't need to turn to these leaders to really feel kind of empowered in our own lives.
This is the Final Straw Radio special podcast edition of our chat with the fine folks at Haymaker Gym, the feminist, anti-racist, and autonomous gym project up and coming in Chicago, Illinois. So this is a question I hadn't thought of before, but just to sort of like flesh out some of the words that we use. Autonomous is not in the normal American lexicon. Can you all talk a little bit about autonomy and also capital A autonomy?
Sorry, say that again. Can we talk about autonomy and also capital A autonomy?
Yeah, because there's the influence of social movements that, movements against capital and state in Europe that are still happening, that differentiate from anarchism in some ways, or overlap and flow with anarchism and also other other political trajectories. But I'm wondering if one of the things that's informing this project, since y'all had talked about being involved in stuff in Europe and social centers in Europe and resistance in Europe, if you can talk about the influence of the concept of autonomy or autonomism.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, now you're going to get us in trouble, I guess, with our histories. I mean, it's probably various reasons why we use the language of autonomy. But I can say, for me, so autonomia obviously was a particular historical movement that emerges both, I guess, primarily in the kind of 70s and early 80s in places like Germany and Italy and what have you. And part of the project is that we see, even within our own collective, like some of us are very much identified as anarchists of like maybe an insurrectionary type, and some of us are identified as communists of an insurrectionary type. But there's definitely kind of ideological differences, I think, in our lineages. And I think historically the usage of the language of autonomy was an attempt to, I guess, be partisan but non-ideological in a certain sense. And I think that's one of the elements that we're doing for here. The other aspect of it is, of course, I think just using the language of anarchism is very risky and very loaded. So I guess from a strategic point of view, autonomy is just something we've hooked onto. But you're right that it doesn't really have the kind of resonance or salience in the U.S. context that it does in European context. And maybe that's bad for us. Maybe we've overshot our own strategic possibilities here. And maybe some language like independence perhaps is much more something that resonates in the U.S. context.
No.
But I don't know, So that's one of these elements, that autonomy is about precisely one of these ways of trying to bridging together elements from different traditions that we see ourselves going towards. So that's one of my answers. I don't know if Joy wants to say how they position themselves vis-a-vis autonomy.
Yeah, I guess I come from a very typical place of direct action, small a anarchism, with rising tide and earth first stuff. And so the language of autonomy appeals to me because it sort of unites all the sort of anarchist things that I did, So if you help in squats, and if you're feeding people, you're trying to get food they're dumpster diving, you're stop halting, projects that are going to hurt the community. It's the idea of autonomy is creating the conditions of living together that capitalism doesn't provide for, people like me and other people. Autonomy sort of unites all those things together in a way that makes sense. And in maybe a way that anarchy or anarchism sort of doesn't suggest. So I think anarchism sometimes can get caught up in different direct democratic forms, when really it's there's a material basis to all of this organizing. It's actually having food, actually having housing, actually having muscles. So yeah, that's sort of why it sort of has a more material view for me in my very American experience of anarchy, I guess.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that our usage of autonomy is an attempt to kind of separate ourselves from the more, let's say, anarchist projects that we see happening in Occupy, for instance, that are really emphasized and perhaps even have a fetish of consensus building or collective decision-making processes, where the process becomes actually more important than the material relationships that are cultivated and the affinities that are developed between people. So I guess it's an attempt to differentiate ourselves from that brand of it. But no doubt, I mean, many of us, I think, just unequivocally identify ourselves as anarchists, and we don't in any way object to that tradition. But I guess it's just a new kind of conceptual terrain that I guess we're trying to bring into the U.S. context. But who knows if it'll be successful.
Oh, you have to try to find out. Yeah, and me asking wasn't at all meaning to, I was curious. I heard the word come up a few times, and I think, discussions around autonomy and around, the relations that we have to power and the power that we have ourselves and with other people, those are conversations that definitely happen. And I think great projects happen that aren't called anarchist also, Yeah. But it's about intention, and it's about being clear about one's intention throughout like some degree of transparency among the people that are participating, or at least a shared knowledge of a lack of transparency, so that people know what they're getting into and know who they're working with.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the language of autonomy is also. I mean, it's important for us to explicitly separate ourselves from There's obviously a longer liberal tradition of viewing autonomy where there is an autonomous, independent subject who is seen in the eyes of the law or in the eyes of the state as not being interrelated with or intermeshed with other people, right? And obviously, our vision of autonomy is rooted in the fact that it's collective, and so as people, as individuals, as subjects, we're all interdependent, intersubjective, and so what that means for us is that building autonomy, as opposed to the liberal vision of autonomy, where you can really have an autonomous, separate subject that's not related to other people and has this kind of tension with the community. We see ourselves as being very much rooted within building collective power.
Totally jumping ship. What sorts of activities are engaged with at the Haymaker?
Yeah, so, Haymaker isn't built yet. Obviously, we're in the crowdfunding, people sourcing sort of stage. We're still organizing. We plan to have meetups this summer, and so look out for that if you want to come to a meetup and train with us. So and obviously we're gonna have martial arts training in various styles, and at the meetups we're planning to have some of the trainers that have contacted us train, and they have various traditions that they're coming from, like Aikido, mixed martial arts, Muay Thai. There's a lot of more innovative self-defense forms. So that's happening. We plan on having self-defense focused sessions aimed at quick response, tactical trainings for direct action. A lot of that involves physical things, so it'd be a great place to host those trainings. Collective defense practices, coordination with other autonomous projects. Maybe someone else needs, a space. Hosting other groups. We're in talks with Muslim defense groups, Black Lives Matter in Chicago. We're hoping to collaborate with other groups in Chicago, be able to provide a space for them. And also hopefully a juice bar, because juice bars are awesome, and we think that a body needs to be healthy. And then the usual talks and readings.
That's exciting. I didn't realize that y'all hadn't set up and formalized a space yet. But yeah, how long? So where can people find out information about the crowdsourcing and possibly contribute to it?
Well, we have an Indiegogo, but there's the Haymaker website, which is haymakergym.org. But there's also our Indiegogo page where we're fundraising. And so that could just be found on Indiegogo if you just go to Indiegogo and look up Haymaker. So in the meantime, I mean, the lack of formalized space is because we're still in this period of fundraising, right? So for us, it depends on the space. From our position, the space will happen, the gym will be created. The question of fundraising is how easy and how stress-free, I guess, will the process be in terms of fundraising. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Do you have, at the point that you're at right now, do you have any suggestions that you can share if other people are looking to start projects like Haymaker where they're at? What sort of lessons have you learned so far that you can share that might help some people skip some hurdles that you've found?
So we learned a lot through the process, and we frankly didn't know anything about doing this, so don't let that get in your way. A lot of our success just comes from having the initiative to do things. Don't let that get in your way. The first step we would say is, talking to your friends and making new friends who share a goal and affinities. Conversations over a meal or a drink can turn into longer conversations, and eventually you just need to start organizing and taking small steps to create what you want to see. It helped that most of us came together at an autonomous social center. This gave us a supportive network, but we really just sat down and started making a to-do list. And we still do that every time we meet. As the campaign is rolled out, we've learned a lot about what we would do differently next time, what we really need versus what we thought we needed, and how we work together. This is a collective experiment in a new way of thinking about living. So a lot of patience and a lot of to-do lists and a lot of friendship. Yeah, and then there's some specific, very specific technical things we learned that maybe Meyer wants to talk about.
Sure. So one of them was I think it's important to not let the alt-right make you paranoid, but also take necessary steps to protect ourselves from having our identities discovered, especially online. I mean, we've been seeing a lot of doxing campaigns from the alt-right, but we need to. I think there are a lot of different positions on how one relates security culture to questions of doxing, but obviously doing the necessary precautions about one's identity online is really important. But at the same time, not to let security culture be so stifling and suffocating, such that you don't take initiative to do these kind of projects, because obviously the secret is to begin. So threats and attention from fascists can take a toll on organizing, and we've actually had a number of attempts to both hack into us, and we've found discussions on 4chan boards about the gym project and about people in Chicago that want to raid the project when it comes in. And so we see these kind of discussions going around. To what extent they'll actually materialize, I mean, who knows? But it's good to know that, I mean, people were enough of a threatening force to them that they feel that they have to react against us. But security culture, of course, is real, and you can't be too careful with one's online presence. The second point I'd say is that crowdfunding is really open to anyone with an internet connection and skills in media shaping. So obviously, if your message resonates with other folks, then they'll fund it. And the people who have donated and contributed the most to our campaign, having political allies, friends, and families, as well as people who hear about our campaign through the media, of course, the Final Straw Radio. So thanks again for interviewing us.
Yeah.
But one of the things I do want to say, and I mean, this is one of the things for me noticed, and maybe Joey has different feelings about this, but one of the things I've noticed from doing the fundraising campaign, because we've had this month and a half long campaign now where, at least in terms of my focus, has been really on fundraising, and it's made me realize just how much our scenes fundraise, and we do a lot of it, So we see now, especially in this period, we're fundraising. We have friends who have a squat nearby us who are asking for donations. It's Going Down is asking for donations. There's a new submedia channel that's asking, So we ask for a lot of money in our communities, and that's no doubt. And this process has made me much more aware of that. But it's made me realize that, and one of the things that we're turning to do in the campaign is that instead of actually looking horizontally towards other people asking for money, perhaps asking other anarchists and other communists for money who generally don't have all that much is perhaps not the most sustainable way to fund projects. And so for us, we're trying to rethink about fundraising strategies instead of actually asking our communities to do it, but instead we're kind of looking more vertically. So now we're kind of in the process of stepping up our game and, in a sense, being somewhat more professional, taking ourselves quite seriously and approaching businesses and approaching other community groups who we think have more money than us, because liberal groups tend to have more money because radical projects tend to not be very well funded, and trying to orient ourselves towards these groups to take their money. So that's kind of where we're at now. And it's a larger conversation, about how one orients towards fundraising and whether really turning to other anarchist folks and asking them for money is the best kind of approach. But really the funding goal is key. And so to try to think through the list and all the expenses and be realistic about what we need has been one of the things that obviously is quite important. But regardless, I mean, obviously we need to maintain the ability to revise and change our plans. And so we also plan to make use of the existing gyms and local funding that our other projects have. And as with all organizing, reaching out and working with other groups and individuals is really necessary. And so gyms of this caliber are usually quite expensive. And so we haven't seen anything on offer like this in Chicago. So who knows? But one of the things that we've been really struck by, at least I've been quite struck by, is the amount of support that people have responded to us. And so one of the initial things that we had in our budget was the ability to maintain a kind of somewhat of a sustainable payment towards trainers for the first year or so. But the amount of trainers who've actually come to us and said that they want to help us out and offer free training has been very humbling, because I guess our initial approach was that we wanted to provide fitness training and martial arts training to people who are already politically oriented. But we didn't realize, at least so I didn't realize, that there are a number of people who are already involved in martial arts training and fitness and gym training and personal training who have those skills but don't have the political outlets. And so they turn to us in order to get the kind of political outlets that we wanted to provide for other political folks in terms of the fitness outlets. But those are some of the things that I've kind of thought about and reflected on. I don't know if you have anything you would like to
add. No, yeah. And then like the basic expenses of a martial arts gym are actually, I mean, in our city, space is a lot cheaper than maybe New York or LA, but that's one of the factors we have going for us. And yeah, it seems totally doable, especially like if we get a few sustaining members of the gym, then it'll be free for everyone. And it's not a hugely expensive undertaking, and a lot of people are excited about this.
It to a few points of what y'all said, I think that that's very smart to be looking vertical, or at least outside of our own circles, for funding to people that might be sympathetic in some way, shape, or form. And yeah, because we don't have money. So the model of like kind of one thing that I think that's interesting about some subcultures I've seen, like Tikunus subculture, for instance. I think there's a lot of things they get wrong, but I think that one thing they do get right, they'll probably hate me for saying subculture, is reaching outside of the people that look just like them to sort of fundraise resistance projects. So whether it be like starting bars or farm-to-table restaurants or whatever, pulling in resources that way seems like a smart way. And so,
and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, if you want to think of it again from the lens of autonomy, right, there's two positions, right? Like one is like you need the initial financial capital to get projects off the ground, right? So that means money for like weightlifting equipment, right? But once you have the equipment and such, then beyond maintenance costs, already you have the material infrastructure that's already there. And so then the second position is about sustaining oneself. And so the attractiveness, precisely these kind of Tikunus projects that you're talking about, is at least they provide a vision by which we kind of break the cycle of constantly fundraising for each other, but we have some sort of projects that at least provide some sort of constant turnover of capital in this kind of world that we're living, which seems to be one of the ways. I mean, it's interesting, and we need to think about other ways of breaking out of these cycles, but it's true that beyond the constant fundraising, at least establishing these kind of independent projects that do aim towards generating capital and then reinvesting it in the scene seems to be quite helpful. What other ways in which we can do this, we don't know. But really, money is always this kind of limit point of our beyond initiative, which I think really is much more of a limit point than people probably realize. But beyond initiative, capital is always just this wall that's very hard to breach.
I was also thinking in terms of the Joy, did you have anything that you wanted to say?
I think they're called Apollistas, not Tikunus.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It's my preference. Sorry.
As a Tikunus, or as an Apollista.
I hadn't heard anyone in the U.S. call themselves that, so that's good to know. I hope I haven't hit a nerve by speaking in the third person about Apollista projects.
Oh, no, we don't care.
Okay. Do you think that so having talked to like martial artists around this area or people that do self-defense training, that seems to have been like the point of having a political outlet for their activities and way to train people seem to have like provided a point of conflict in their life. Because if they're doing this one thing professionally, in a lot of cases, they're also relating on a day-to-day with law enforcement or like-minded people who take self-defense trainings. I wonder if that's a conversation that's come up much. like a sort of like professional conflict or danger around people's jobs doing that sort of training?
Yeah, it hasn't, though. I like, because of this project, we've all become interested in different forms of martial arts and self-defense. And so I actually went to a Krav Maga training, and like every single person in the room was related to the police in some way. Either they were like administrators at like the police office or actual police officers. So, yeah, I can see that arising. A lot of the, yeah, I think a lot of the trainers that we've spoken with, they actually have carved out a niche for themselves. So like Aikido is actually geared more towards, disabling or stopping the person from harming you, but not necessarily harming the attacker. So that's sort of not in line with that. Other people have just, straight up left the army and are extremely alienated from all of those forms of work. So they've just completely left and made away themselves. So we haven't really seen a lot of that conflict. One of the trainers was a CrossFit fitness trainer who also had additional self-defense skills. So yeah, so we're seeing these types of things where people are trying to move away from that culture, actually.
That's really, really awesome to hear.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, we had just as a small personal anecdote, I had a conversation with somebody who was very keen on the project, and they told me in a very cute manner about how they're not really familiar with anarchism, and they've always had kind of anti-authoritarian leanings, but they've never truly had an outlet by which they could explore precisely this politics, although they've had 18 years of teaching self-defense training. So to me, that was like a very nice experience by which, you have people in their 40s or 50s who are very experienced trainers, but they've never had the opportunity in their own lives to truly engage their own self-defense training or their fitness training with a kind of more explicitly partisan political project. And so I think for us, it's quite nice to hear that. Also, there's quite a significant amount of queer self-defense training in Chicago, which I think for us, we're kind of in communication with some of these folks. Some of the people involved in the Haymaker project are queer self-defense trainers. But one of the things that we've noticed is that these projects tend to be very sporadic. So there's a number of trainers who offer self-defense, either explicitly queer self-defense or self-defense just for women and trans folks, but they don't have easy and ready access to space. And so that's kind of one of the spaces that we see, one of the points where we see the Haymaker project intervening in, where we don't have, as Joy was saying, I mean, we don't have martial arts skills, but we have the ability to kind of, we have organizing skills, I guess. And so we see the project as precisely enabling space for people who already do the self-defense training in Chicago, but don't have a ready site by which they can do it regularly and cheaply. Because that's one of the other things, the cost of renting space in Chicago for these trainers, my understanding is quite pricey and it's quite difficult to get space. So hopefully this project will then provide a resource by which other people already doing explicitly queer self-defense training feel more comfortable about having their home base in the Haymaker gym.
Well, that's really awesome. Is there anything that we didn't chat about that y'all were looking to cover? Because I think this has been a good conversation, and I've gone through the questions. But
yes, a lot of people have reached out to us and asked, what are some ways we can help the campaign and the crowdfunding, we have a Facebook page and a Twitter for folks who want to follow us. You can share the things we post aside from donating, and we're definitely looking out to talk with more trainers. Anyone who has equipment to donate is another huge resource that I think people are interested in providing. Or anyone who wants to be part of the project or train with us, definitely reach out, and we'll keep them up to date. And we've also talked with a number of people across the country who are interested in doing the same thing. There's the base in New York. They already have a meetup. and they're thinking about getting their own gym as well. So that's happening in New York. In Seattle, there's another gym of this kind that's being built up, and we've had contact from other people. So yeah, we're definitely happy to help give advice or share our experience. Definitely listen thoroughly to this podcast. Yeah, that's mostly what I can think of. Myron, do you have anything to say?
No, it's been good. I don't know if you have any other thoughts that you want to share, but no, it's been nice chatting.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you both, Myra and Joy. Thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time and doing this awesome work. And I hope in the future I can chat with you all again about how Haymaker's exploded the scene in Chicago and is, enabling all these people towards autonomy and self-defense. And yeah, I'm really excited about that project.
Yeah, let's hope it comes to fruition.
Fingers crossed. I hope you enjoyed our interview with the Haymaker Gym. They are, again, in the last days of their Indiegogo campaign, so if you were feeling like passing the hat or holding a fundraiser or hitting up Daddy Warbucks himself, George Soros, for them, please feel free to. If you enjoyed this episode and you get our show from the iTunes library, drop us a review, rate us 5 stars, and help spread this show. Also, if you like hearing our podcast and you want our interviews to make it into the cars, trucks, jail cells, basement apartments, and everywhere else in your area, consider hitting us up and help us figure out how to get on your local community radio. Our shows are an hour weekly, they're free for stations and people to download, and are clean for the radio. Right now we're airing in Columbus, Ohio, Asheville, North Carolina, Olympia, Washington, Santa Rosa, California, and Fairbanks, Alaska. So why not in your hometown? Hey, William, where can people find archives of the show going back 7 years?
At thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can always email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you are interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email if you do. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw, care of Asheville FM, 864 Haywood Road, Asheville, North Carolina, 28806.